Hi all and welcome back to the channel. Most of you are probably aware by now that Yamaha released a firmware update, version 1.20. I hadn't planned on updating just yet, as I didn't think any of the updates were relevant for how I use the Genos 2. I watched a few videos and most of the discussions were around the slider update, which is something that never bothered me as I'm new to the Genos series and I know no different. It's probably a good idea to keep my machine up to date, so I decided to install the new firmware and video the differences with a side-by-side comparison on the off chance it was of interest to anyone deciding whether or not to update their firmware. In case you're not familiar with the updates, the list of changes is on Yamaha's website. The info given is short and sweet, but did leave me scratching my head at one point, as I didn't quite understand what had changed regarding the sustain update, but eventually I figured it out. I wasn't sure what version I was on, but it's easy to check. I'm not sure if there's a quicker way, but I just went Menu to Utility and then System, and it shows the currently installed version at the top. It looks like I'm actually a couple of updates behind. To update, I followed the instructions on Yamaha's website. It's recommended to back everything up. I never do that, but that doesn't mean it's right. I just always have my fingers crossed that everything will work out as it should do. I downloaded the file from Yamaha's website, removed the USB from the Genos 2 and plugged it into the computer. I'm using a Mac, but I'm assuming it won't be much different if you're on a PC. I dragged the .prg file onto the root folder of a USB stick, and I'm not sure whether it was the right thing to do or not, but I removed the older .prg file from the USB stick just to avoid any potential issues. Once it had copied, I plugged my USB stick back into the Genos 2. It said to insert the USB stick into the USB to device slot, which I noticed was labelled at the back of the machine, so that's where I put it. Still following the instructions, I pressed and held the Start-Stop button on the style control section, turned on the Genos 2 and followed the on-screen instructions. It was fairly straightforward and didn't take too long to install, just enough time to solve a Rubik's Cube. Once it was installed, I switched off the machine and placed the USB stick back into the front of the machine where I normally keep it. Once the machine was switched on, I had a quick check to make sure that the firmware had been updated to 1.20. So a quick comparison of the changes. Before the update, if I held down sustain and switched off the voice selected instruments, the instruments would stop sounding. I did get confused at first, as I thought it meant the sustain button, but I soon figured out it meant the sustain pedal. This isn't something that's ever affected my playing, but it does seem a sensible update, and at least I know now it won't cause an issue in the future if I ever use this function. Before the update, if I used the vocoder and messed with the joystick, nothing happened. Now the update's installed, the joystick works as a pitch control. Again, it's not something that I've ever used, but I probably will now that I know that there's the option to do that. One thing I've noticed though is that it's hard not to physically alter the pitch of your voice when you're moving the joystick. I guess the more relevant update in the firmware is the slider control. It's never bothered me, as I don't mess too much with the sliders for it to be a problem, but I was interested to see what the difference would be. Before the update, if you wanted to adjust the style slider for example, you had to move it to a point where it would catch the value relevant to the slider position. I know a lot had problems with this. With the new update, you move the slider and the value jumps to match the position of the slider instantly. I have to admit, I think I'm a fan of the jump option. It does seem to make more sense. This function can be changed following the instructions from Yamaha by going to Menu 1, Live Control, Menu at the top, and then tapping the slider mode section. You can leave the window open and swap between the two options to see which suits you best. And that's it. Fairly easy to update, a couple of nice additions there to the Genos 2, and hopefully many more updates and improvements to come in the near future. Thanks for watching.